I'm going to speak for about 2 hours with a break in between at some point, and I'm going to cover 3 sections of the program this morning. I'm going to cover the effective dates of the new 2014 construction codes. I'm going to cover the administrative provisions. That's the Title 28 stuff, 28 dash da 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 da. And I will talk about existing buildings and how this covers this 2014 code revision affects applications to the department regarding existing buildings. So let's start with the effective date. Okay, so we've broken the next several slides into new buildings, existing buildings, site safety, like that. And I'll talk about new buildings first. I mean, everyone is asking, when does this affect my projects? When do I have to worry about something being different? October 1 is the date. If there's anything you remember from these 6.5 hours, is that October 1 is the date. The way the law is written, it gives people an allowance not to apply the code on October 1 for a permit issuance date or a plan approval date, but when you submit your construction documents to us. We have issued a buildings bulletin, and in the email you received from ACEC, the last item of the links that they give you is the buildings bulletin. It explains in much more detail than I'm going to go over today how these effective date provisions work. That buildings bulletin explains in more detail, but understand that if you submit your documents, that's AP entire status, and for those people who understand our computer system, AP entire status, a complete set of drawings. If you submit them to us and we accept them, we don't have to approve them. You don't need your permit, just have to submit them to us, and they have to be complete. Then if you do that on or after October 1, you're always going to be under the 14 code, and if you submit them to us and get that AP entire status before October 1, it will be under the 2008 codes, and all the codes that go along with it. So that makes sense, but what happens if I submit my architectural, my structural, and my foundation drawings on or before October 1, and then I file my fire alarm application 8 months later? That fire alarm application will be reviewed under the 2008 codes as long as your architectural, structural, and foundation drawings were submitted prior to October 1. And that's how it works. It's similar to how we did it last year, but that's how it works. There is no period where you can choose either one. It's an on or an off. October 1 is the date. Before October 1, after October 1. Alterations are a little bit simpler. For alterations, it's just before October 1, on or after October 1. And it's a submission of construction documents to the Department of Buildings, receiving that AP entire status in the computer, and that's what determines which code you will use for your alteration. And when I say which code you will use to the alteration, that does not mean that after October 1 you must use the 14 codes for all your alteration work. No. It means that you apply the alteration provisions of the 2014 construction codes. So what does that mean? Well, the 2008 code tells you how to do alterations, and the 2014 code likewise will tell you how to do alterations. It doesn't mean you must always use the 2014 codes for your alteration, but there are certain times you might need to, for fire suppression, accessibility, maybe some other things. But the alteration provisions, as I'm going to go into in my third segment, you'll see there are some differences, and some very important differences. So that date of October 1 may be very important for your alteration, because how we treat alterations is changing in some fundamental ways on October 1. And it all depends and is triggered by when you submit your construction documents to us. And that buildings bulletin will explain it in more detail. So let's talk about Chapter 33. Chapter 33 is the chapter of the building code that tells you the safeguards during construction operations, how we keep our sites safe, how to underpin properly, and how to keep your fences and netting and all that stuff, how to keep debris. It also has some important provisions that tell you who might be qualified to perform certain types of work, or to get on certain types of rigs, or to lift certain things. Those are changing on October 1. So this might be very important for you if you are on a large project where you have to determine those types of things. So again, it's October 1, but there are some nuances, and I'll walk you through some of those nuances. We have site safety jobs and non-site safety jobs. Now that's a colloquialism, non-site safety jobs. What does that really mean? Well, our building code tells you what a site safety project is and what it is not. And generally, it's tall buildings are subject to the site safety program. Very large buildings in footprint might be subject to site safety whenever the department determines that there's a reason why we want it to be a site safety job. It can be a site safety job, but it's usually the biggest projects. The smaller projects, smaller buildings are typically not site safety jobs. So let's break it into the two categories. So if I have a small building, say a 6-story apartment building, that's not typically a site safety job. I look there and I look at the construction documents that were submitted, and you'll see that the 08 code and the 14 code determination is the same as the application that was originally submitted. So if I submit my new building or submit my alteration work for this 6-story apartment building on or after October 1, I will be subject to the 14 code, and the 14 code also for the site safety provisions of Chapter 33. But if I submit that application before October 1, September 28th, I will use the 2008 codes, not the 14 for the construction, but I will also use the 2008 code and not the 2014 code for the site safety until that project is signed off. If it's a site safety job, there's that nuance. It does not depend on the submission of the application for construction document approval. Instead, it depends on when you get your site safety plan approved. The reason for that is that you ought not to be able to rush in your plans, your structural foundation, and your architectural plans on September 29th, get them submitted to us, spend several months getting plan approval, waiting 11 months before you put the shovel in the ground, spending 3 years topping off, and still be using the 2008 provisions for site safety. The building might be 2008 code, but if the site safety plan is approved after October 1, it will use the 2014 codes for all of the site safety work. Because we want that up front. We want that to apply sooner. And it's those large buildings that are most likely to go on the longest, and that's why the second row, the site safety jobs, is different than the normal. But if you're not a site safety job, don't worry about it. This Chapter 33 follows the same code that your underlying work follows. And of course, full demolitions are a little bit different, not on purpose, but after we looked at the law and read it, our engineers and our staff said, wait a second, full demolitions are treated differently. And I said, are they? We read it, and the lawyers agreed. Full demolitions are a little bit different. Full demolitions depend on when your construction permit was issued. If your full demolition, I'm demolishing an entire building, was on or before October 1, that's the permit issuance date, you're under the 08 code. And if you are doing a full demolition and the permit was issued, the work permit was issued on or after October 1, then we're in the 2014 code for Chapter 33. Okay? So I've broken down new buildings, alterations, site safety work, and full demolitions, and that's the whole gamut. And that's very good because I did that fast enough that I think I can slow down a little and go through the rest without rushing, which I think you might appreciate. I tend to talk fast, but let's see if I can do this at a pace that's not too quick. Okay, so there are some exceptions to these effective date provisions. The exceptions are written into the law. One of them is for some elevator inspections. Because of whatever reason, the council enacted this law with two particular provisions effective immediately. And if you are in the elevator world, if the phrase elevator inspection agency means anything to you, then that's important. If the words elevator inspection agency do not mean anything to you, then it is likely that that effective date is not important to you. The other one is a particular provision of BC 403. BC 403 covers high-rise buildings, the largest buildings. And in fact, this particular provision applies to buildings that are more than 420 feet in height. So we're talking a 30-story office building, maybe a 40-story hotel, really large buildings. And this particular provision will require additional egress. You'll hear about that later on when we talk about Chapter 4. You'll hear it later today. But this provision does not take effect on October 1. It will take effect in the future depending on some zoning change, which will be necessary to effectuate that provision. Okay, so those were everything about the effective dates. Now, I'm going to have some time for questions, I think, later, and we'll have a microphone, but I'm not going to do that now. I'm going to go through this, my next segment, and then at the end of these segments, we can have questions. I'm going to talk about the administrative provisions, Title 28. One thing that you will notice right away in 28.101.5, which is the definitions, is that there is a new definition for limited alteration applications, LAAs. Okay? These LAAs are jobs that are not filed by architects or engineers. They are filed directly by licensed trades, either by a plumber, a licensed master plumber, a licensed master fire suppression piping contractor, or a oil burner installer. Those are the types of work that can be done, and in the past, it was limited to $25,000 a year, and it was limited per building. What this code change does is it breaks it into two categories, Category 1 and Category 2. Category 1 LAAs are the same thing that we knew. There are some new expanded descriptions in there, and you're going to want to read them very carefully because you might not need to have to file plans and engineers and sign-offs by the architect or engineer if the licensed trade can do it themselves. Okay? And the limit has been upped to $35,000 per year per building. Category 2 now has no limit in terms of price or per building. And to put it in perspective what that really means, so let's say I wanted to change all of the sprinkler heads in a building, and it's going to be the same deflection pattern, the same K rating, the same dispersion pattern, the same model numbers, and it's just changing. I don't want to say change a light bulb. It takes more to change a light bulb than change a sprinkler head. But those are the types of things that are now in this Category 2. And when you read that definition in 28.101.5, you will see what those are, and it will make sense to you, and you'll say, oh yeah, it makes sense not to require an engineer or an architect to file plans for these kinds of things. It's almost like a maintenance, but we in New York City regulate them much more than in other jurisdictions, and that's why there are no limits to them. They still have to be filed with us. They still have to pay application fees. We'll still send inspectors, and they'll still be signed off, but it won't require the architect or engineer. So that's LAA changes. Landscape architects. The 2008 code said that the only applicant on a PW1 can be an architect or an engineer, and the landscape architect said to us, but I receive a license from New York State, and there are certain types of work that are under my jurisdiction. I ought to be able to file them, and this new 2014 code recognizes that for certain types of applications. Note that it does not include the stormwater and the plumbing and the engineering of the subsurface stuff. That's not included. But this allows the landscape architect, the RLA, well, new term we have to learn, RLA, Registered Landscape Architect, to file certain applications, file the PW1, be a subsequent document, et cetera, all that kind of stuff. Okay, I think most people were doing this already, but there's a change in 104.7.7 that the progress inspections also have to be listed on the cover sheet. We've always said that the special inspections have to be listed. It wasn't explicit about the progress. Now it's explicit, so we'll do that, and our examiners will look for that, and that's a good thing. This is a funny thing. Okay, so you'll hear later about a retroactive requirement for certain hospitals, nursing homes, and assisted living, like the enriched housing, those kinds of things, to install something in the future by the year 2022, 2023, something like that. They have to install hookups for external generators. This requires that every application that comes in on those jobs or any alteration has to identify at the time of that application, even if I'm only renovating the cafeteria, that either they're exempt or not exempt from this requirement 15 years ago. The council was worried that people would not be aware that they might be subject to this retroactive requirement years in the future, so it requires a notation on the construction documents. Is that important to you? If you file I-1s, I-2s, or R2s, which are assisted living, or not, I shouldn't say assisted living, those are I1s, enriched housing, adult homes, those kinds of things, then this is important for your construction documents. Another provision that's administrative is geotechnical investigations. The question was always, do I need a permit to dig a hole so I can get my permit? The question you may have got wasn't clear in the code. We would look it up. And now it's crystal clear. It tells you the limitations. When you look at 105.4.6 and it refers you to Chapter 18 and Chapter 33, it will delineate specifically what kind of holes you can dig, test pits, borings, those kinds of things without obtaining a permit if you follow certain requirements and within certain limitations, that there be supervised by a RDP, Registered Design Professional. It tells you what to do, and you can look at that, and that will save a lot of paperwork and gobbledygook, and it's a good thing. Okay? Temporary uses and structures. Now we're up to 28.111. Okay, 28.111 was rewritten. It was intended to be clearer and make a distinction between a temporary work permit for a structure versus a temporary use letter for an event. If I want to have an event in a place, and I'm not talking about places of assembly, I'm talking about some other kind of event, and the C of O isn't for that, but I want a temporary occupation for a certain thing, that's a temporary use letter. And now it's crystal clear what the standards are, what the fees are, explains that. A temporary work permit for a platform, a tent, those kinds of things is separately specified, and it's a little bit clearer. It also changes the maximum number of days to up to 90 days before you have to renew. I will tell you that the fees have been adjusted accordingly, so getting a 90-day permit is not going to save you any money. And I also will say that it's not allowed to get it for longer than you're going to need it, and the borough may limit the number of days depending on the nature of the event. But you can get up to 90 days, and it makes it a lot easier for those renewals for things that might be known to be there for, for half a year. Okay. Permit fees. It was clear to us that the equipment that was being installed, the machinery, the boilers, the solar panels, that's part of the alteration cost that goes into your permit calculations. Also, overhead and profit. It's the reasonable cost that you pay for these kinds of work that's being done. That's all included in the value that you calculate to determine what the permit fees are, and that's made a little bit clearer in the amendments to 28.112.3, and you'll see that when you go through the book. Okay. Now, there also was not anything clearly in the text that when something changes to your building, it's been renumbered, the address, you've changed the block and lots, what happens to the old C of O that sits on the books that's no longer there? This gives a 1-year window within which time the owner is obligated to come into us and obtain an amended C of O. And this provision has some streamlined processes built into the code that tells you what kind of inspection is required if this is the reason why you need to do your certificate of occupancy. But of course, if there are other reasons why you need the certificate of occupancy, then the streamlined provisions in the section would not apply. I think we know that. Okay, next slide. We're on slide 16. So, periodic boiler inspections. To the people in the boiler world, and most of you are not, but there are new deadlines and some new provisions with respect to the inspections. And if this is your world, I recommend you look at 28.303. But given the time and the people in this room, I'm going to breeze past this slide to 17. Now, same for elevators. If you're in the elevator world, there are new deadlines and new provisions. And the one that I bring to the attention of people in this room is 304.10, 28-304.10. It requires certain occupant notification for planned outages. If you're going to do an elevator repair and it's going to put an elevator out of service for a period of time, read that provision. It tells you certain things you must do in terms of notifying the occupants. And that's minimal. You can always exceed that. It always makes for happier tenants and happier occupants if you give them as much information as possible if you're going to put an elevator out of service. Okay. Can everyone hear me? Okay. I mean, I could get closer. Is that better? No. This is good? That's good? Okay. Okay, so retroactive requirements. In the 68 code, 1968, it was not so clear what was retroactive, what wasn't. You had to search through the book. You couldn't really find it very easily. We adopted the 2008 code, and there was no repository for retroactive requirements. Yet the New York City Council passed many retroactive laws since the 2008 code. So we wanted to have that in one place so that you can look. And you will look on this list, and you will see all of the retroactive requirements that were enacted after 2008 in one place. Now, the 1968 code retroactive requirements still apply. If you have an office building more than 100 feet in height, you still need to understand what Local Law 5 of 73, 16 of 84, 26 of 04, all those magic words, those laws we know, they're still on the books, and they still will require those retroactive sprinklers or fire alarms or exit signs that we had to put in back in the 70s, 80s, and 2000s. They're still on the books. But those retroactive requirements that were enacted after 2008, they're all in one place. Some examples, and I'm not going to list them all. You can look at 28.315 and see them, because they're all old news. The council passed a law that you have to retroactively paint the sprinkler and standpipe risers and certain cross connections, things like that, in the basements and throughout the building. You had to paint them red by the year 2010. So that's now listed in 28.315. It might be green also. There's some red, there's some green. Then it says accessibility signage. There was Local Law 47 of 2012. That required certain signage if you have some entrances or bathrooms that are accessible and some aren't. Now, a new construction won't allow you to have that separation, but old buildings have them, and this was a retroactive signage requirement, and it's on the books. So now it is noted in 28.315 so that you can see it on your list of retroactive laws. This is another one by the year 2026. Roll-down gates on certain occupancies must be 70% open. No more solid roll-down gates. It already is a requirement for renovations. If you're replacing one, it must meet this from day one. But if I have an existing one, I have until 2026, and unless you dug through all these laws, you wouldn't see it. Therefore, it is now in 28.315 in one nice place. There are some new ones that are going to become published for the first time in October 1 with this new local law, with our 2014 codes. There are some safety upgrades for elevators, and if you are an elevator professional and you deal with that, you will want to look at 28.315, and it will refer you to Appendix K, which will have certain upgrades for certain types of old elevators. There is a requirement by the year 2021 for an emergency source of water for basically, I'll say, apartment buildings that rely on pumps. If you have an apartment building that relies on a pump to get water to the tenants, we're very concerned, or the council was very concerned, I should say, if the electricity goes out and your pump doesn't work, what are you going to do? Is there a fixture somewhere on the ground floor or below the level that you need the pumps to get water so they can get their buckets? That's what that's about. And you must do that in all these buildings by 2021. That's new, and it's listed in 28.315. It's a retroactive requirement. Okay, the I1, I2, and R2 buildings, I will say certain R2. Those are the R2s that are adult homes and those kinds of buildings. They will have to have a connection for an external generator unless their generator is elevated above the floodplain. And if I am a hospital, I will have to have a temporary connection by the year 2033 for a boiler and chiller to maintain air conditioning and heat in my hospital, unless all of those emergency generator facilities are located above the floodplain. So those are things that are retroactive and they're new. They may or may not affect the projects that your clients have, but you can look at 28.315 and see them all in one place. And when the council passes another retroactive law, and they will, this is where you'll find it. Okay, so let's talk about sewage and stormwater. And if anyone is still using the term SD1 or SD2, please don't. Those forms don't exist. They have not existed for a couple of years. They're House Connection Proposal Applications and Site Connection Proposal Applications, HCP and SCP applications, right? This portion of the law will clarify and actually changes how we do business a little bit. You will see in this table BC and PC. The sewage provisions of the BC 107 are identical, word for word, to the plumbing provision of 106.6.1. And the stormwater provision of BC 107.11.2 is identical, word for word, from PC 106.6.2. So the only thing to understand here is that it duplicates, and if you look in the building code or the plumbing code, it's going to say the same thing, but there is a difference for the sewage and the stormwater. I'm going to walk you through how that works. Okay, so let's talk about sewage first, okay? Not the stormwater, the sewage, toilets, sinks, those kinds of things. The way the code is working now is it establishes when DOB will not approve the application unless there is something from DEP. It's going to be a piece of paper. We want that piece of paper. That piece of paper will be required in 3 categories with respect to sewage. Every new building will require that piece of paper from DEP. The only exception is if there are no plumbing in the building that produces sewage. I could see a 1-story garage that only has storm water. We were not going to require anything about the sewage for that. But if it has a sink in there or a toilet, then obviously, but most new buildings produce sewage, they will need this sewer certification. Then it says an alteration requiring an increased size of connection. So let's say I have a 6-story building, I add 2 stories to it. I've added so many fixtures that my fixture count says I need a bigger connection and I have to make a bigger connection. That's when my examiners will ask for that piece of paper. If your alteration does not increase the number of fixtures such that when the MEP engineer does his calculations and finds out that the fixture count doesn't require an increased size of connection, we're not going to ask for that piece of paper. We're talking about sewage, not stormwater, sewage. And then let's say you are moving the connection to a new location. Whether or not you're increasing anything, we'll also ask for that piece of paper. And that's sewage. And under sewage, we have those submittal documents, that HCP, SCP, not the SD1 or SD2. We're going to ask for something from DEP certifying whether it's available or feasible. Well, the people who know this is more complicated. It's certifying that there is a sewage, a public sewer that is available or feasible connection thereto. That's the word there, but you can get to it. Or DEP is going to certify that it's not available and not feasible to connect, or one or the other, I guess. Either one. If it's not available or it's not feasible, then DEP will give that piece of paper. If it's not feasible, I can't permit the building. It's not going to happen unless you can approve that there is a septic system that can be installed on that site, meet all of the requirements that we impose. So there are some places in Staten Island and Queens where mostly, I should say, where septic systems are still permitted for sewage. And if you can prove that, that's fine. But if you can't do, if DEP says you can't connect or it's not feasible or available, we're not going to approve it unless you can also show compliance with septic. That's how it works. We are going to require that piece of paper in every case. And the next slide is the same, but with a big red there. DOB is no longer in the business of measuring whether you're 100 feet, 150 feet, 500 feet, 300 feet, all the numbers. Not for us. DEP is going to do that. DEP's forms are going to do that. DEP's requirements will determine that for us. If you are going to self-certify that you're not available or feasible, that form goes to DEP, gets stamped by DEP, and comes back to us on DEP with the DEP stamp, and that's what my examiner is going to accept. My department is no longer in the business of measuring distances. That's all DEP, and that's where the answer comes from. Let's talk about stormwater. You're going to find out that stormwater is very much the same. We are going to require that piece of paper in 3 categories, slightly different. Any new building, even if it's a garage, it doesn't matter. A new building, you're going to give me a document from DEP. If I'm altering a building, read this very carefully. Horizontal enlargements, ignoring existing paving, or impervious surfaces. I cannot tell you how many times someone has come into my office, they show me this plan. I'm doing an enlargement in the backyard, but I'm not increasing the existing impervious surfaces. The whole backyard was already cement from years ago. I go on Google Earth, I look, it's a beautiful green yard. Any enlargement is the trigger for the DEP paperwork. Horizontally, not vertically, because vertically you're not, the existing facilities ought to have been already approved or grandfathered, whatever they are. But if I horizontally enlarge a building, paperwork. Okay. Alterations that increase the impervious surface. Now let's say I want to add a paved area. Okay, that's one of my three categories. Those are the three things that my examiners will now say, give me something from DEP, and we go through the process. And of course, what would a code be without exceptions? We have exceptions. If I have a 1 or 2 family house, and the code basically grandfathers and starts again from 2008, okay? That old stuff you had, whatever you had is there, exists. We couldn't go crazy trying to relitigate what happened in the past. But post-2008, if I have a 1 or 2 family house and you're doing less than 200 square feet, it will be absorbed into the existing systems. Unless you want to do something extra, we're not requiring it. It may be that the existing facilities tend to back up or something like that. If you know of something, good engineering practice is going to require that you do something. But my department will not insist on it if that horizontal enlargement or increase in impervious surfaces is less than or equal to 200 square feet, and that's looking cumulatively post-2008. So you can't do 195 square feet one year, 195 feet the second year. It adds cumulatively post-2008. Now, for all buildings, whether it's a 1 family, 2 family, or whatever, if it's equal to or less than 1,000 square feet post-2008 cumulatively, if you provide on-site retention. Now, I always got detention and retention confused, but retention holds it and keeps it on site. You retain it. Detention, I think of like high school. They detain you, but they don't keep you there forever. They'll let you go eventually. So that's how I remember. Okay, so if you can provide, and normally this is with dry wells, but you'll see in our plumbing code, we now allow other means of on-site stormwater disposal on-site that are not necessarily dry wells. You can design an engineered system, that's fine. If you can show us a dry well system that meets the distances to the yards and the buildings and the perk test is okay, and you can design a system, you can do your 1,000 square foot addition or less without going to DEP and getting the paperwork. But let's say you are required to go to DEP, you are required to get that paperwork. How does it work? You either get that HCP/SCP with respect to stormwater, certifying that there is a public combined or storm sewer that is available and that connection thereto is feasible. And DEP may condition their approval on detention or retention. They can do that. And those in the business who do this stuff regularly, you know that they often do that, and then they will review whatever they do. Or you will get a piece of paper from DEP saying that an HCP or SCP certifying that there is no public storm or combined sewer that is available, or that if there is, that connection thereto is not feasible. If that is the case, then I cannot approve the application unless there is something I can approve that has on-site, not detention, retention. There we go. So that's the way it works. We think it's a little easier. The only thing I will highlight again is that DOB will not determine the availability or feasibility. That means that DEP is going to be the one that takes out that measuring tape and says whether 100, 300, 500, whatever those numbers are, that's going to be their job. They will determine it. And if it is a professional certification of those requirements, then we will utilize what DEP says. You're going to self-certify on their form. They'll stamp it as being received, and that's what comes back to DOB. It's no longer a DOB form. It's no longer a DOB review. It's a DEP process. Okay, so let's move on. The operational changes that I put out there as kind of the big picture things to look at and think about. is that there will be changes in BIS, our building information system. That's our computer system that manages all of our processes. Forms may be different. The PW1 will have different questions all of a sudden. They'll be asking you things you didn't have to check before in response to this changes in the law. E-filing may be a little bit different, and required items may be different. The areas with the most significant changes, I'd say, are LAAs, those limited alteration applications. We talked about that. They're going to be very different. The PW1 form itself, and special inspections and the TR1. There are now some new special inspections. We expect that the registration process will be up by then. There are not that many of them, and they're not that common special inspections, but there are some new ones, and there's been some renaming. You'll see that in chapter 17 and hear about that later. Okay, so now I'm up to alterations. Helen, how am I doing for time? I'm good? Okay. Because I'm going to need to ask you how much time I have for questions when I get there. Okay? So let's talk about alterations to existing buildings. This is the third component that I wanted to talk about. Okay. And it looks like I'll have lots of time for questions, right? So far, okay. Well, let's see how I go with this. You heard Commissioner Fariello talk about an existing building code replacing the 1968 and the 1938 building code. I can't wait. Yes, right. Round of applause for that. Let's get rid of that. Okay. For those of you who practice in Long Island or Westchester, or Onondaga or Erie County for that matter, in New York State, you know that when you alter an existing building in the rest of New York State, you look at the New York State existing building code, it accepts what's there as a lawful condition, and then tells you what to do based on what's there, depending on what you want to do. It doesn't make you go back to the building code from 1938, dust off some books, and try to figure out what the fire rating ought to be. That's a peculiar situation we have in New York, and it's something we want to address, and very much so. We want to adopt the ICC's IEBC. It's, if you read the Mayor's Affordable Housing Strategy, it's in there. He wants to do it too because it will help us renovate buildings simpler, easier, cut the red tape, and get to what needs to be done to ensure safety without jumping through bureaucratic hoops. We want to get there. We will start a process. We'll have an open call for committees. We will involve stakeholders like we have before and figure out what we can do to adopt the IEBC here in New York City. But we're not there yet. So what we have in the interim is what we had before with some tweaks. I'm going to walk you through, someone's shaking their head, I'm not sure why, what we have in the meantime, okay? So let's see what it looks like and what it will look like, because I will give you a timeline. So let's say we start this next year sometime. It takes us a year to get through the process. It's going to be a couple of years before we adopt this in New York City. And we're looking forward to it very much. But life must go on, construction must go on, and alterations are a lot of what we have. We have 975,000 existing buildings in New York City, and a lot of them get renovated. And we can't stop that hoping that we'll get this done in the next 2 years. We've got to move on. So let's see what we have. So in the 2014 codes, we have some new terminology just to clarify how we deal with things. We have this idea of an existing building, and it's newly defined. An existing building is a building that exists. It's been completed, it's done, it has its C of O, it's signed off, whatever. But we break you into two pieces based on whether it was built under this code, meaning the modern ICC codes. It was built under the 2008 code, maybe it was built under the 2014 code, doesn't matter. Once it gets a C of O, that's this code. And when the code says, you shall comply with this code means the current code, the one up to date. A prior code building is a new term. It's defined, and when you see a provision that says these are special provisions for prior code buildings, what we mean is a building that's not under this code, but one from before. And I have on the right there, everyone will recognize the cover from the 1968 code. Some people here ought to recognize the one to the left of that, which is the 1938 code cover. I don't know how many people remember the 1916 Code of Ordinances from January 1, 1916, but it's out there. On the left of that, the 1898 Consolidation Code of the Greater New York City. Okay, we go back and we go back. And here's a picture of Peter Stuyvesant's house. That would be a prior code building. Okay, so we get in our heads what we understand prior code. It's not under these codes, and we address them separately. Okay, so first thing I want to bring your attention to is this new provision 28101.4.5. The reason for this provision was that people were starting to come to us with applications which we would perhaps have issues with, where they would take a one-story building, they would want to add 20 stories and say, no, I'm going to use the 1968 code. That's kind of absurd if you think about it. We had to come up with a solution for that. Okay? And what this provision does is it imposes the 2014 codes for certain types of big alterations. Okay? Let's see what that means. Everyone, or people who in the know here, know TPPN 102, which will allow you to use the older codes and use the file as an alteration rather than a new building if you meet certain criteria. And those criteria have been occasion for many, many CCD1 forms, I should say. I'll leave it at that. That's not going to be there anymore. It's going to be gone. When I hit that button, hit the red X, I think it was at the in Fort Totten at the Queen's AIA and the Queen's New York State Society of Professional Engineers. There was an audible gasp in the audience when I put the red X through the. Okay. So what are we going to do? Well, the code says that if you increase the existing floor surface area of a prior code building by more than 110%, you're basically more than doubling it. If I more than double a building, then the building is going to comply with the new code, and you'll file it as an NB, and the fees will be calculated like an alteration. I more than double it. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't, you might have a practical difficulty and you'll come in for a variation because the columns or the masonry, whatever, is in the wrong place, or it's an old tenement you can't get, whatever it is, okay? We have some authority to vary the provisions of the 2014 codes, but the bottom line is if you're more than doubling a building, and we even gave the extra 10%, more than doubling it, then you're going to comply with the 2014 code. So it has this definition, and I'm not a fan of reading definitions to an audience of 800 people who are going to be here for 6 hours, so I won't. But basically, it includes all the horizontal surfaces, including roofs, and the roofs of bulkheads and superstructures, and all this stuff. It was intended to be a little generous so people don't get stuck on the wrong side of that line in the sand when they're really just doing a minor change. And you can read the definition, you'll understand it, and yes, we've heard questions, what about sloped roofs, what about attics? We will be issuing guidance on this, so please don't ask those questions. We will get there. We've heard those questions already. Now, what's important to understand about this is what's accepted from that definition of the floor area that you then add. Now I will say that, before I get to the exceptions, that it includes the cellars or basements. So what's accepted? Square footage removed during the course of the work, and square footage that was previously installed but signed off less than 12 months before the submission of the current application. Well, the first one really means if I have a 5-story building and I take it down to a 1-story building and then I want to add 5 stories back, I start where I got down to. The least common denominator is a 1-story building. That's where I'm going to start measuring from. I'm not going to measure from what I had. I'm going to measure from what I ended up with before I start putting back. And the other one says that you can't add it, sign it off, add it, sign it off, add it, sign it off, and get out of it. Okay, you see where it's going. Unless it's signed off for 12 months. Now, if you want to add a story, sign it off, wait 12 months. Add a story, wait 12 months, sign off. Good luck to you. If you have a client that patient and it's that important to you, you deserve it. You really do. Okay. So let's see how this plays out. Okay, so let's say on the left, it says 1, 2, 3, 4, but how many story building is that? Can you see? How many stories? 3, no. How many stories is that building on the left? It's a 2-story building. Okay, I just want to make sure we got that. I have a 2-story building. Now, I'm counting 4, and I told you it was a little generous. It doesn't want people stuck on the wrong side of that line. But once you're on the wrong side of that line, there is a line in the sand, and my examiners are going to follow it. And it says what it says. So I have 4 levels there. I have a roof, I have a second floor, a first floor, and I have a cellar. That's 4. If I just can add on top of that, and I can add a 5, a 6, a 7, and an 8, and really that's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-story building. I can change that 2-story building into a 6-story building, right? And have 8. And that 8 is still just double. It's less than 110%. That can be filed as an alteration, does not need to meet the requirements for a new building necessarily, although there are some provisions we'll talk about, but that's how we get there, okay? If I add that extra story, now I've exceeded more than double, I've exceeded 110%, and now I'm in the world of NB and probably some variances if you have some issues. That's how this works. But that assumes that that 4 existing, which is a 2-story building, is being kept intact, and that the roof joists are being maintained. Roof joists being maintained. Well, those roof joists may have been designed for a load that's not going to handle above. So what happens if I want to remove the roof? Okay, so next slide. I'm on slide 41. I have that same 2-story building, but I've removed the roof, and I start putting things back. I no longer count that roof towards my 110% because it's been removed. I add as many as I can. I end up from a 2-story building to a 1, 2, 3, 4-story building. I can do that. And I still get to file it as an alteration. I don't have to file it as an NB, and that's how it works. Add that extra story, now I'm more than 110%, and that's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-story building. So my 2-story to a 5, now I've hit the number, and you'll file it as an NB. What happens if I remove that roof, and I remove the cellar because I want to dig it down? Think about it. What do I have left? I don't have much of anything left. I've got some wood holding up by some joists, some things, and you'll see that I can still file it as an alteration if I basically put it back to be a 2-story building with a bigger cellar, but the minute I make it a 3-story building with that bigger cellar, now I've exceeded the 110%, and I'm in a new world. I'll follow the 2014 code for the new building, and if I need a variance, we'll deal with it, but our examiners are going to look at it and say, line in the sand, you've crossed it, and that's where we are. That will prevent people from taking a 6-story building, tearing it down to a 1-story building, using an old TPPN, and then reconstructing a 10-story building as an alteration under the 1968 building code. Okay. Now, I just took a picture of this, and I hope the architect's not in the audience here. It's very nice. It does this thing. It adds up. I can't tell you whether this would or would not have been subject to these provisions because I don't know what they did inside. It looks as though the thing on top is smaller than what's inside, so it's probably less than 100%, but they may have replaced the joist inside. I don't know. One thing to note, 2 things on slide 44. The change of the scope of work from under to over the 110% must be refiled as an NB before continuing any more removals. I've heard over and over again, it was the termites that did it. I'm sorry, I rebuilt the whole building. I didn't realize. The contractor found termites, they tore down the whole thing and started rebuilding. No, once the termites are found and you take away more than you thought you had to take away, you stop, you refile, you move it forward. The other thing that's very important, exceedingly important, is the zoning. The fact that you might be required by my department to file it as an NB does not take away any rights that you may have had to maintain non-complying bulk or use. So you may take away a lot and put back more than you had, but zoning, as long as you keep 75% of what you had in some cases or whatever it is, may allow you to keep that non-complying bulk. May very well. So there's separate inquiries, and you have to think about them that way. Okay? And that's a good thing, because that means you might not have to take away your non-compliances. Okay, so one thing I want to talk about is 101.4.3. All the slides I've talked about so far were 101.4.5. That's that big alteration provision where we push you into complying and upgrading your building because what you're putting back is so much larger than what you're left with. What happens if I'm just doing an alteration, I don't hit that trigger, I'm just doing my normal work. I'm renovating a bathroom, I'm adding a small enlargement, I'm doing some stuff to my building. We've had this 28.101.4.3 for 4 or 5 years now. We've all gotten used to it. There were a series of exceptions. There were originally 7 or 8. The council added and added and added to it over the years. We've essentially maintained 28.101.4.3 that will allow you to use the 1968 building code for any alteration. Of course, the ones that don't become that big reconstruction alteration. You can still use the 68 building code, and if the 1968 building code allows you, you can still use the 1938 building code. You can still dust off those old books because that's the system we have in place until we adopt the existing building code. We still allow that all to happen, but the exceptions have changed. There were 7 or 8. The council added up to like 15 or 16. Now there are 19, and I'm going to walk you through those 19 exceptions. I think I'm still doing okay, right, Helen, for time? Okay. Let's walk through that and see what we have. Okay, so 19 exceptions. Number 1 is the same as it was: fuel, gas, plumbing, and mechanical work. That's got to follow the 2014 codes, no matter what I'm doing from alteration. But there are some nuances and some things we fleshed out, and I'll explain what those are in coming slides. Fire protection systems, same kind of deal. We've maintained exception number 2, just like from the 2008 code, but I'm going to walk you through what's different later on. And you'll hopefully understand that it's a lot easier and there are fewer pitfalls for the design professional when applying exception number 2 in the future. Elevators, conveyors, and amusement rides, we've kept that exception. You're still going to use the 2014 code for your alteration for elevator work, but we've clarified what that means a little bit, and you'll see that. Exception 4, even if I'm using the 68 code or the 38 code, I will use the 2014 construction codes for safety during construction operations. That's chapter 33. Accessibility, we've always had exception number 5 in the 2008 code. We've maintained that, but we have clarified and reorganized it so that you don't need to look at local law 58 anymore. And you'll hear about that as I go through the accessibility provisions. Encroachments into the public right-of-way, same as the 2008 code. You will look at chapter 32 of the building code for your projections, your balconies, your stoops, your handicap ramps, all that stuff. Chapter 32 still applies. And you'll hear from Mr. Kaminer later today that there are some new exceptions that will make it easier in landmark districts to deal with encroachments. Administration enforcement, we're still going to use the 2014 codes for permit issuance, violations, all that kind of stuff, even if you're using the 68 code. Special inspections, of course, we're going to use the 2014 codes. We're not going to go back to the controlled inspections. It sounds funny to say that now, controlled inspections. It almost hurts my mouth. I've gotten so used to saying special inspections. Okay. Materials, security grills. Security grills are, that's the provision I talked about, the roll-down gates. If you're putting a security grill on a building, it's got to be 70% see-through in certain cases, and that was added by the council. We've retained it. It wasn't, exception 10 was not in the original 2008 code, but it was added by the city council between 2008 and 2014, so you will see it again in the 2014 code when the ICC does the publication. Energy efficiency, we know from our local law on the energy code that, of course, for alterations you follow the energy code. That's nothing different, that's nothing new. Roof coverings and replacements. These 3 components, and I urge you to read it in more detail, will tell you that if I'm roofing a roof, don't go back to the 68 code and use the 68 code back to the 38 code to determine what kind of class of material, what kind, is it A, B, or C rating, and what the asphalt mesh is made out of. You'll use the 2014 re-roofing provisions, and that ought not to be a problem. It actually standardizes and uses modern materials and ASTM standards and stuff. It's a good thing. Cool roofs, it's enacted by the council, and we've maintained it in the 2014 code. It requires, in certain cases, that any re-roofing in an existing building, even if you're using the 68 or the 38 code, you might need to, depending on the square footage and depending on what kind of building it is, you might need to make it a light color. Cool roofs save energy, and that's a good thing. And green roofs. This is a provision that allows you to jump ahead and use the 2014 code for your green roof, even if you're using the 68 code or the 38 code. It's just an allowance. It's not a requirement, really. And you'll see that when you read 28.101.4.3 exception number 12. Okay. I'm not through to question exception. How am I doing? How? 10 minutes, okay. So before the break, right? So maybe break after, questions after break, probably. Okay. I'm on slide 50 now. Handrails. This is actually not a very onerous provision. It says if I'm going to reconstruct an entire stair enclosure in a building that I'm using the 68 code or the 38 code, the handrails ought to comply with the 2014 construction codes. Now, for your own liability, you'd want that. The handrails have to have extensions, a certain size, a graspable, all that stuff that keeps people from falling. It's actually very important. The ergonomics of grabbing handrails, that's the reason why a lot of people fall, and using the modern standards is good, and this does not impose it on you, although we urge you to use it all the time anyway, but it does not impose it upon you unless you are reconstructing an entire stair enclosure in a 68 or 38 code building. Guards. This is very important. Guards would apply to your balconies, drop-offs before a cliff of some kind. This is new. And it says that if I have a 38 code or a 68 code building and I'm doing an alteration application, and part of that alteration, and even a repair, is dealing with those guards on my balconies, I am going to use the 2014 code for those guards. And that's important for the structural stability and how they're connected and all those kinds of things. And that addresses some issues we've had in New York City in the past, and it's important to understand that provision. Areas of special flood hazard, we've always had this. You have to look at the Appendix G to understand what to do for an alteration, and we have some requirements for that. Structural, don't get scared. The structural provisions are not that great, but they are there. It actually has many allowances, and when I get through those provisions, it'll explain how to use modern calculations and modern structural things that these engineers do to your old buildings in a way that helps. There are only 2 new changes, maybe 3, regarding maybe wind and maybe the stuff like that. We'll get there when we talk about structural. Emergency and standby power. You're going to use BC Chapter 27. You ought not to be looking at the 68 building code anymore for that. Parking garages and open parking lots. There's something about electric vehicle charging station ampacity for your electrical service. If you're doing something and changing the electrical service of your garage or parking lot, you might need to do this anyway, now, even if you're using 68 code. And mold protection. Basically, if you're putting drywall as a renovation in your 68 code or your 38 code building, you're going to use the 2014 code, which will require mold-resistant drywall in subgrade spaces and some other areas. I mean, for your new building, you should know that too. If you're doing subgrade spaces now, it's going to be mold-resistant drywall. If someone in this room is the one who specifies drywall, make a note of that. But that's important even for alterations. Okay, so now what I'm going to start to do, and then we'll take. Thank you. I'm going to start this for about 10 minutes, and then I think we take a 15 or 20 minute break. They'll tell me. These particular exceptions, exception 1, 2, 3, 5, and 16, I need to go in a little more detail and explain them because, and you'll read at the top, it says, special provisions for prior code buildings. Now, we know what a prior code building is, right? Think who was that, Mayor Stuyvesant, right? Special provisions for prior code buildings. These exceptions will send you to other places in order to apply those special provisions. Exception 1 will send you to PC, plumbing code, FGC, there's a C missing there, fuel gas code, or mechanical code, 102.4. Exception number 2 will send you to 901, and exception 3 will send you to 3001. Accessibility will send you to 1101, and structural 1601. And what's nice about 901, 3001, 1101, 1601 is you can always find it. It's always the first section of 9, the first section of 30, the first section of 11. It's always one. And then it's the last subsection of the first section of every chapter. The plumbing, fuel gas, mechanical follows the ICC format, and we did that. And the reason we structured this way is that there were really 2 sources of confusion under the 2008 code. One was that there was a lot of confusion. What if I'm renovating part of something and something else? Not all these things, but some of the things. And we had to issue all these bulletins about what do I do when I'm doing part of something but not all of something. And the committees wanted it written into the code that explains exactly what happens in those instances. What if I'm changing my chiller and it has non-combustible fill and I can't do, it has combustible fill, I can't use non-combustible, whatever those things are. The engineers, the architects, the people on the committees wrote into these provisions what to do in those cases. The other thing I have here, I call it two parallel universes for fire protection and accessibility. And that was problematic because you would read exception number 5 for accessibility and it would say, oh, it's simple. You use this code for this, and if you don't hit the trigger, you go back to the 68 code. But then the 68 code puts you through a maze. It's the old local law 58. Very complicated. Same for fire protection. It tells me my change of use is subject to the 2008 code, that's what it said. But if I'm not subject to that, then if I exceed a certain dollar value, I might have to do something under local law 10 of 99 or under 27-114 or 15 or 16. So it was a complicated circle people got stuck in that we think we have clarified. Okay, these are the examples. So under the 2008 code, the current law on the books, I get to choose the 68 code. Beautiful, I'm choosing 68 code. But I have exception number 2, fire protection. And what it tells me is that any fire protection work that I do, or any change of occupancy that I perform, will require compliance with the 2008 code for fire protection. But let's say I don't hit those triggers. I'm not planning on doing fire protection work, or I'm not changing my occupancy. I look at then I get to go back to the 68 code, free pass, right? No, not a free pass. If the cost is more than 60% of the building, I'm still going to have to update it to the sprinkler provisions of the 68 code. Not the 08 code, no, the 68 code, that's what it says. What if I'm between 30 and 60, then that's a space. What if I exceed 50%? If I'm a multiple dwelling, I exceed 50%, then I have to sprinkler. And if it's a multiple dwelling and I exceed 50% of the replacement cost of the space, I have that. So you have this hopscotch jump around, ping pong, to figure out what I'm doing, and that was deemed a little cumbersome. And our goal was to move that all into one place to make it a little clearer, to avoid the applicants making mistakes when they come to us. So we've brought that all up into the last section of 9 is 901, and the last subsection of 901 is where you're going to find these provisions. And we have repealed the 27.123.1, et cetera, and placed it where it belongs in BC 9. Similar with accessibility. If you read the 2008 code now, it will tell you that you must follow the 2008 code for your accessibility if you change the main use or dominant occupancy of the building, or if the cost of your alteration exceeds 50%. Okay, it says that. And if I hit those two triggers, go to town. I will look at chapter 11 of the building code. I will figure it out. I will make the whole building comply. But what happens if I don't hit those two triggers? Hurrah, I get to use the 68 code. But when I look at the 68 code, now I have to go back to local law 58, and I have to look at what I touch, I have to comply, but I'm not using the 2014 code standards, I'm using the 1986 ANSI standard, which is in itself not perhaps the easiest solution. And if I change the occupancy of the space but not the whole building, I still have to then comply anyway. But I use the 1986 book, not the 2003 ANSI standard. So it's a little circuitous. We will get you always to the right answer when we help you. We do that. But for the practitioner sitting in their office, it's not so simple. So what we've done is we've repealed the 27.123.1s, we've moved everything up, you're using the modern standards, and we explained to you in the last section of chapter 11, 1101, the last subsection of 1101 will tell you how to do that. And the way you get there is from the new exception number 5, which sends you to the prior code building provisions, the special provisions for prior code buildings in chapter 5. And we think that this addresses those two sources of confusion when only part of the system is being altered, and when we have these two parallel universes for fire protection and sprinklers mostly, and accessibility. And what we've done, it says here, we've consolidated the fire protection and accessibility provisions into BC 9 and BC 11 so that the Title 27 is no longer needed for those provisions. We've also incorporated buildings bulletins where possible into the new code so it's in one place, and we've made some other minor changes to simplify. And I think that's what I'm going to, let me keep going to the appointed time. I think I can keep going, right? 5 minutes, okay. And then we'll take a break. So these special provisions, as I said, are exception 1, 2, 3, 5, and 16. And I think what I have to do, is it okay if I take the break now and come back? Because this is the right break point. I think, and I need to know before I let people go, exactly how much time is the break? 20 minutes. That means it's 5 minutes to 10, right? So we are going to come back at quarter after, right? Quarter after. Okay, thank you.